as Vladimir Putin's forces continue to wage war in Ukraine.
As the war in Ukraine rages on, civilian casualties are mounting.
There has been no let-up in the fighting.
The pressure is building in Russia.
Putin is having to lie about the campaign at home, and he's paranoid about the failure.
With further escalation on the cards, and peace talks so far going nowhere, how could this war end?
There's an astonishing drone video of Russian columns in streets in an urban area east of Kiev. And it's astonishing because it shows you how the Russians are not learning, sending these armored forces in without infantry screening the armor around them to push back other forces, without aerial protection and air cover. Those mistakes signify not just Ukrainian resourcefulness and ingenuity, but I think also deep Russian dysfunction and failures.
Even on Russian state television, they're now talking about how they got bogged down. The mothers, the wives, the girlfriends, the sisters, brothers, etc., are starting to get notices of their dear ones dead, and getting, watching a war on the sofa on television is one thing, but actually having people die in this conflict is quite another. Which is why Putin cannot actually call for general mobilization, at least not yet. He never prepared people for this war. He called it a special military operation. It was supposed to be done within presumably a few days. But Putin is a man who can never, ever accept his mistake. He can never accept his error, because actually that would be not just the loss of power. At this point, I think it would be much worse than that. And he will go on because it's now his life is attached to this conflict.
He's having to lie about the campaign at home, and he's paranoid about the failure and the huge miscalculation he's made. That failure, what that does to his power base. So he's worried. The people around him will be trying to blame each other. They'll be trying to find scapegoats. He'll be paranoid and anxious.
There are reports that two very senior members of the FSB, which is Russia's domestic security service, the main successor to the KGB, have been placed under house arrest. And these two individuals were both involved closely in planning for the invasion. So that gives you a sense of the sort of mood in Moscow and the sense of anxiety.
If you think of the mechanism of a coup, what is it? How does this come about? Well, it comes about when some people who are close to power think that their time is up, and they think that someone is about to move against them, and that if they don't act first, they'll end up in jail or dead. And so that's why this is such an unstable moment, because the moment at which blame is being cast is the moment at which everybody's looking to see whether they're the ones who are going to end up carrying the can for this disaster. And if they're convinced they are, then that's when they move, and they try and move before they're arrested. So this house arrest is like the starting pistol firing, and we'll see how it unfolds.
There's two sorts of risks. One of them is that the war going badly compels Vladimir Putin to use something like chemical weapons. And that creates intense pressures on Western governments to intervene. And of course, when the Syrian regime used chemical weapons in 2018, the US, UK, and France conducted airstrikes against them. That won't happen in this case. It won't happen. And I think although the no-fly zone debate will revive, I think ultimately there will be no appetite in the Biden administration or in Europe to seriously contemplate shooting down Russian planes or blowing up Russian air defense systems. However, there are other sorts of interventions we could see. So, for example, could we see a debate over whether NATO should send chemical, biological, radiological units, protective units, to a site where chemical weapons had been used? I ultimately think any combat forces on Ukrainian soil in a way that may drag us into confrontation is still a very, very low probability outcome. But the pressures for that outcome will grow in the aftermath of such an atrocity. But the second possibility, even without the use of chemical weapons, is a scenario in which Vladimir Putin decides that Western arms supplies are causing him too many problems, that this represents Western intervention, and that he attempts to strike a arms depot in Poland or simply strike a arms convoy moving into Ukraine in the western side of that country. Those sorts of things could easily involve escalation to a NATO-Russia conventional clash, and then that could spiral into Russian nuclear use that would create pressures for Western nuclear use. We shouldn't exaggerate those risks. I think with the Western governments are absolutely keen to stay out of this conflict directly, but nor should we be complacent about those risks, because they do exist, and these are certainly the highest prospect of war between Russia and the West we have seen since the 1980s, if not before.
My best case scenario is that this does not actually escalate into the use of chemical or nuclear weapons of mass destructions. So whatever the peace settlement is, my absolutely best hope is that we come out of it. We'll not come out well. Nobody will come out of this anytime soon, I don't think. But minimizing and not letting it into a stage of complete catastrophe would be my best hope at the moment.
Ukrainian morale, self-belief, is hugely important in their effort to counter Russian attacks. And one way to destroy morale, I think Putin's hoping for, and an old way, it goes back to the 19th century when Russian forces used artillery against cities, is to try and kill civilians and to make people miserable. And I think if you do that, you present Zelensky, with the Ukrainian president, with a decision, which is, do you go for peace? Do you settle in some way with Russia in order to spare your people? And by killing people now in indiscriminate ways and in large volumes, you present Zelensky with that very difficult choice. For me, the best outcome is a negotiated settlement that leaves Zelensky government in place, in which Zelensky willingly makes some agreements, such as recognizing Russia's hold on Crimea, and says he's not going to join NATO, but he willingly does it. This is not something that's imposed on him. And then that Russian forces withdraw, including from all the areas they've occupied. And I think that has two advantages. One is that the Ukrainians themselves, having forged a nation in this crisis, would then be free to go their way, and I think their way leads towards the West. And the second point is that I don't think a Russian leader, especially not Vladimir Putin, if they do that, will invade again.
Thank you for watching. For all our coverage on the war in Ukraine, please click on the link and don't forget to subscribe.